Hello there, my name is Mr. Wizardly. Damage cantrips, am I right? I'm so bored of looking at my class's spell list and then picking Firebolt or Toll the Dead and then calling it a day. It's just so lame. But what if I told you that it doesn't have to be this way? That you can get more variety in the kinds of damage cantrips at your disposal. Really mix things up a bit more. In this new D&D YouTube series, I'm going to be giving you many more options that will help make your characters feel just that little bit more different from each other and give you more basic choices of things that they can do. These videos also have the added benefit of being much easier to produce in a timely manner than most of my longer videos, so I'll hopefully be able to smooth out my upload schedule, which has gone through another rough patch recently. So without further ado, let's get stuck in. If at any point you feel like your eyes have started to glaze over because what I'm talking about is just too technical and you just want to skip ahead to the new cantrip that I've made, then join Devil Gang over here and jump ahead to this timestamp. I won't judge you. There's no shame in wanting to get straight to the good stuff that everyone's here for. But I think that for those who are interested, it is first worth having a look at the baseline to figure out what actually makes a good damage cantrip. After all, we need to know where to set the bar for our new creations. Let's start with the obvious. What is the one damage cantrip that everyone immediately thinks of? No, not Eldritch Blast. That was a special case and deliberately overtuned. Warlocks be like, my precious. The actual answer? Good old trusty reliable Firebolt. So, just what is it that makes this cantrip the presumed default pickup by most people? Let's lay it out for you. There are two types of damage cantrips in the game, those that make attack rolls against a target's armor class, and those that force their target to make a particular kind of saving throw. Firebolt declares that you make a ranged spell attack when you cast the spell. So what does this mean? Well, if you're watching this video, I think you know what an attack roll is. You've probably made thousands in your time, but there are still a couple of important things to note. Firstly, just like with ranged weapon attacks, a ranged spell attack roll is made with disadvantage while there is a hostile creature within 5 feet of you, so it's only really usable when you don't have enemies up in your grill. This is a noticeable downside. However, that said, attack rolls are statistically slightly more likely on average to hit all but the most heavily armored of targets when compared to making enemies fail a saving throw. I've done the math, as the Americans like to say, and it turns out that Firebolt has, give or take, around a 5% greater likelihood on average of landing a hit, unless an enemy has an above average AC or a below average modifier on a target's saving throw. Let's look at a few common monsters to get a feel for this difference. Let's assume that you're a level 1 wizard with a 16 in intelligence, giving you a +3 modifier, and a +2 proficiency bonus, for a total spell modifier of +5. That's all pretty standard, I'm sure you'll agree. We'll be comparing 4 common choices for wizard damage cantrips, 3 of which come from Xanathar's Guide to Everything. Firebolt is a ranged spell attack. Create Bonfire forces the target to make a dexterity save, Frostbite forces a constitution save, and Toll the Dead forces a wisdom save. That covers attack rolls and all of the primary saving throws. The wizard will start by fighting bandits. These guys have an AC of 12, which is 1 below average for their challenge rating. They have +1 in dexterity and constitution saving throws, and they have +0 in wisdom saving throws. If you look at this chart here, that gives Firebolt a 15% higher chance of landing a hit compared to a Create Bonfire or Frostbite, and a 10% higher chance of landing compared to Toll the Dead. Uh-oh, here comes the bandit's leader, a CR2 Ogre, with his AC of 13, which is exactly average for his challenge rating. He has a noticeably below average dexterity and an even lower wisdom, but sky-high constitution. Even with a -1 to the Ogre's dexterity, you can see that Create Bonfire is actually just as likely to hit it as if you used a Firebolt, due to that added 5% average bonus that Firebolt tends to give you. With constitution saves against this guy, you might as well go home, with only an overall 45% chance of the Ogre failing its save against Frostbite. But with Toll the Dead targeting a very weak wisdom, it is actually 5% more likely to affect the Ogre than a Firebolt is. For our last example, our wizard and his friends are going to gatecrash some poncy noble prince's party, and the noble is none too pleased with this, so he's going to sick his personal guards on the players. These guards are quite heavily armoured NPCs, wearing full chainmail, which grants them a 16 AC, 3 whole points above the average for this CR range. This is where Firebolt really starts to struggle, with its chance to hit being lowered to a meager 50%, while you have a 5% higher chance for the enemy to fail a Dex or Con save, and a 10% higher chance to fail a Wisdom save. In case you were wondering, Wisdom saves tend to be at their worst against enemy spellcasters. Although because NPC spellcasters tend to be centerpiece creatures rather than the majority of the monsters you face, Wisdom tends to have a slight advantage over the other saving throws for general use. Constitution, meanwhile, is usually ineffective against big, beefcake centerpiece monsters, and is better against skirmishers and glass cannons. So if you really want to be optimal with your choice of damage cantrips, you should probably bear these things in mind. So, after all of that, we know that Firebolt is a ranged spell attack. What else? It has the longest range that a damage cantrip can usually get at 120 feet, which, for the record, is longer than the normal effective range of simple ranged weapons like shortbows and light crossbows. It deals a respectable 1d10 damage per tier of play, and the damage type it deals is fire damage. When ranking the different damage types, I would put fire damage as the 8th best damage type out of 10 when it comes to bypassing resistances and immunities. But it does also punch noticeably above its weight, as fire damage also counteracts most forms of regeneration, and most of the damage vulnerabilities in the game, what few there are going to be vulnerability to fire damage. So while 8th best damage type might sound bad, it's actually not nearly as bad as you might initially think it is. There are some definite perks to it. And if you read here, this spell even has the added utility of being able to be used to ignite flammable objects that are lying around the place, which is very convenient. You can start fires as a distraction at very long range, basically at will. Aren't you popular at parties? So to recap and put all of that into plain English, this is a solid all-round cantrip. It has a very long range, a good chance of hitting its target, the second best damage die per tier of play, its ability to start fires grants it modest utility, and its damage type, while commonly resisted, is nonetheless very handy to have against some kinds of creatures. Now, moving on to the homebrew section of this video, I figured that as it's the first episode, I should make it into a double bill. Start simple by showing you one of the less popular alternative damage cantrips, which is to say, Ray of Frost, and demonstrate how you can tweak it to encourage people to consider picking it up more. And then I'll show you a more unique cantrip that I created from scratch, Fire Trap. However, Ray of Frost has half the range of Firebolt, a slightly worse damage type, and it deals -1 damage per tier of play. It also, quite obviously, doesn't set anything on fire. So what do you get in return for all of those things that you're missing out on? Well, when you hit a target with a Ray of Frost, it reduces the target's movement by 10 feet until the start of your next turn. This means that your average monster, who normally moves 30 feet per round, or 60 feet if they dash, now moves 20 feet per round, or 40 feet if they dash. This sets up some basic potential for kiting monsters or making it harder for them to escape. However, while this benefit is stronger than setting unattended objects on fire in most situations, it is not enough to make up for all of the other shortcomings that the spell has. The exceedingly simple fix? Make it 1d10 cold damage per tier of play instead of 1d8. There are plenty of times where you will miss the extra range that Firebolt provides you with, and you'll also be a bit sad when fighting against your average regenerating creature. But you do deal the same amount of damage, and on those rare occasions where your niche utility of slowing a target will be relevant, you'll be very satisfied with how this cantrip now works. Try it out for a bit and see what your players think. I reckon you'll experience a lot more variety of what people pick when sizing up the two. Next up is my own creation, Fire Trap. This spell requires a dexterity saving throw, so it can even be used on creatures that are right next to you, although it is slightly less likely to hit when compared to Firebolt unless the creature has a low dexterity score or high armor class. Look at that strength paladin over there who dumped their dexterity score and made do with heavy armor. He's a prime target for this spell. On a failed save, the target takes 1d8 fire damage and is encircled by a ring of fire, which lasts until the start of your next turn. If the creature moves while it is encircled by flames in this way, it takes an additional 1d4 damage. Both instances of damage improve based upon your tier of play. At first, this may seem to you like a lot of damage, and it certainly is pushing the envelope a bit, and I would say that this is the absolute maximum that you could get away with. However, there are, again, a couple of important things to note. Firstly, it has a slightly shorter range than Firebolt at 90 feet. Secondly, the Ring of Fire doesn't set fire to anything other than the target creature. Third, this extra damage is locked behind a criteria being met, that of the creature moving or being moved. And so the math squares out to -1 damage per tier of play if the target doesn't move, and plus 1.5 damage per tier of play if the target does move. If you look at it that way, it seems perfectly reasonable, as many combats, especially towards the later stages of a fight, tend to become somewhat more static unless the monster you're fighting attempts to flee, as at that point, basically all of the melee combatants will be up close and personal, and also people have fewer hit points, and so are less likely to want to risk taking opportunity attacks. That allows this cantrip to occupy a good niche, while also being a solid all-rounder like Firebolt. And yes, I did consider calling it Fire Spin like the Pokemon special move, but I figured it was too obscure of a reference. Also worth mentioning, unlike a cantrip that works in a similar fashion, a certain Booming Blade, I allowed the extra damage to trigger on involuntary movement. One, because it logically makes sense for it to do so, and two, it really does annoy me that Wizards of the Coast is completely unwilling to allow opportunities for teamwork to happen in this game. And for those of you who are concerned about the multiple instances of damage that this spell has, WotC are currently taking steps to tone down some of the potent spellcasting style features to open up this kind of cantrip design space, making it one damage roll of the spell as opposed to all damage rolls. One last thing that I would like to recommend is giving all spellcasters one additional cantrip from level 1. Why do I say this? Well, simply put, it's because choices are what makes the game interesting. Currently, most classes start out with 3 cantrips, and most of them are going to choose 1 damage cantrip and 2 utility cantrips. Giving you 4 cantrips allows you to take 2 damage cantrips and 2 utility cantrips, or 1 damage cantrip and 3 utility cantrips. Utility cantrips, by the way, are usually situational and require creativity to be useful, so if they do neglect combat options, then there's no real worries there. But if you want to encourage your players to pick multiple damage cantrips to get out of that mindset, you should probably make it so that they must pick a minimum of 2. Personally, I even allow my players to spend gold to research additional cantrips that they can learn on top of their base number, as it allows you to make more interesting choices and gives you another potential outlet for gold expenditure. The most important thing to do is to strike a balance between having a bunch of cool options to choose from and every character I make feels the same because they all have the same options. As it stands, 5e currently avoids both, even though it really should be dangling enough options in front of you to make the combat more strategic and interesting. Under the current limitations, it feels like it's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons, in spite of its many flaws, at least made sure that you got 2 damage cantrips to use, minimum, so that you had a choice to make in combat. 5e doesn't even manage to give you that most of the time. Let that sink in for a moment. So, you can download the new cantrips as a PDF in the description box below, and there is also a link to my free rules for the Flex Sorcerer, an experimental full-class rework of the Sorcerer that seeks to make sorcerers feel more unique again, while also tackling some of the flaws in the Warlock's Short Rest Pact Magic spellcasting design. I've been having a lot of fun with it, so go ahead, check it out, and see if you enjoy it too. And as for my patrons, there's the Death Knight subclass for Bloodhunter, as well as a ton of currently as yet unreleased Homebrew. A full fighter rework and a full monk rework are available currently for patrons on early access. I am so excited to share them with you as soon as I'm done with refining and tweaking them, making sure they're balanced and satisfying to play. So that's all from me for now. This is Mr. Wizardly, signing off.